Amnesty International says Saturday's anniversary marks a shameful milestone for the world's failure to act or hold those accountable for crimes against humanity. And joining me now to talk more about the Rohingya crisis is UNICEF's spokesman in Bangladesh, Alastair Lawson Tancred. And Alastair, thank you for joining us. It has been almost 1 year after the mass influx of scores of Rohingya into Bangladesh. What are conditions like for the child refugees there?
Well, there's good news and bad news, really. On the good news side, these children children under 14 at least, have got access to education. They've got access to child-friendly spaces, which are critically important in a very crowded refugee camp. I think the concern of UNICEF, though, is geared very much towards adolescent children. And by adolescent children, I mean teenagers from 13 years onwards. Because although they've had access to adolescent clubs, and to some extent they've had counselling for the trauma they experienced when they left Myanmar, they still have no formal education. And I think one of the pushes of the aid agencies, especially UNICEF, in the year ahead, months ahead, will be to try and ensure that these children, this lost generation, as we call it, will get access to some kind of education. Because if they don't, then they risk becoming very disaffected. And that's bad news, bearing in mind it's already pretty tough in the refugee camps as it is.
Absolutely. You mentioned adolescents are vulnerable. Are teenage girls the most vulnerable among Rohingya refugees?
Well, teenage girls, I think it's fair to say, certainly have a hard time. We met a group of teenage girls just the other day, actually, and they said that there were several concerns that were top of their list. One, they wanted access to education, which we talked about. Two, they said they wanted access to better sanitation because there's very little privacy for a lot of these girls when they go to the toilet. And three, interesting enough, they said they'd like to have smaller families. And it's interesting, really, that one of the big drivers for change in the camps are young people, and they're not afraid to make their voices heard. And some of them are pushing for change. But we're talking about a very conservative Muslim society here, so it's not going to happen overnight.
Of course, and fortunately, aid groups like UNICEF are there on the ground. You've been providing some much-needed support and aid for the refugees and the child refugees, but they remain stateless. You know, they are stuck in these camps. Is there a sense of despair among the Rohingya in Cox's Bazaar?
I think there is. I think I'd be misleading you if I said there wasn't. There's a sense, certainly among teenagers, there's a sense of hopelessness because statelessness, as you said, brings so many problems. It means that you can't get a passport. It means it's very difficult for the refugees to get out of the camp. Some of them are working in the camps, but not officially. And it's just a very, very grim existence. If you add that to bad weather, when it rains a lot, the water can leak through their roofs. There's a danger of waterborne diseases. There's a danger when it's windy, the roofs of their houses can be blown off. There's a danger their houses could be flooded or suffer from landslides. So it's a tough existence in the camp, and it's especially dispiriting for teenagers because, as I said, they don't have this access to education on top of all those things.
Yeah, a very tough existence for the child refugees, the teenage refugees there in Cox's Bazaar. We'll leave it at that. But, sir, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. You're watching